Okay, this is the second in the series of 5 homilies on the Trinity of God. And I'm getting it out a little bit late because it's wonderful the things that happen when you're paying attention to something. You discern things that were there all the time, but you didn't see them. There's called epiphanies or enlightenments. Or in any case, I'll tell you about it as we come to this as a part of this. But um, the larger frame is that this is a series that assumes various things. One is that for as long as there have been humans, there have been gods, which humans have created um, as a way of constructing a relationship with the ultimate. We want to be able to understand what is the larger nature of being, and so gods are the way that we construct a relationship with them. And our relationship with God, and I use capital G when I'm talking about a God with which we have a relationship. It becomes a person, and the name of that person is God. Um, we construct a relationship in order to be able to relate to the larger reality, but that's a dynamic thing. It keeps changing. And so the perceptions that humans have of the nature of God at any given moment are going to be quite dynamic as well. Part of what that means is that not only is my sense of God different, but my sense of God is different than your sense of God. And so we're in the process of creating this sort of collaboration around, what is the nature of God? Now, that's not the way we normally talk about God. Normally, we talk about God as being constant, unchanging. God is not dynamic. God is always the same everywhere. Uh, the problem with that, from a perspective that we're looking at here, which is that we want to hold together not only religious or theological constructs, but also scientific and philosophical constructs. And from a scientific perspective, the constants are somewhere between a dozen and 2 dozen numbers that are always the same everywhere. And if they weren't that, if those constants weren't the nature of being, being wouldn't exist. Sort of answers the question of why is there something instead of nothing, is because these constants are what they are. But reducing God to those couple dozen constants doesn't create a being that we can have any kind of relationship with. So what I'm sharing with you here is that my best understanding of the nature of God is that it is a Trinity, and the concept of God as Trinity is post-biblical. And so we are creating a new thing here out of kind of the stuff of which the Bible is made, but God is more than that. And typically, we've talked about the Trinity as Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, but the important thing about Trinity is not what are the persons, but how do the persons relate to each other. So I want to suggest to you 3 different persons, which I'm referring to as Creator God, the mind of God, and the love of God. So this morning we're going to focus on Creator God. So this is where I got kind of side railed in putting this together. Is that I was clear about evolution and emergence as being, here we go, emanation, evolution, emergence. I was clear about the nature of God being um, having characteristics that are taught to us by evolution and by emergence, but the idea of emanation is something that was sort of like nagging me. What is that? That's some. I remember hearing something about that from some class in theology or something like that. Right? Um, Emanation is a concept, very old philosophical concept, probably first articulated by Plotinus, but existent in other ancient traditions, the Kabbalah, Gnosticism, Eastern Orthodoxy. Basically, the notion here is that creation didn't happen all at once, despite what we experience or what we read in the book of Genesis, where God created this and then God created that as events. The principle of emanation is that God has created bit by bit, drip by drip, like a stalactite or a stalagmite being formed, little bit by a little bit. Now, this is not a big deal in theological circles today, but in the past, people literally lost their heads over this. So it was hugely important at some point. Um, this is not to say that the Big Bang didn't happen, but at least since then, since the first flash of being came into being, um, what what is the nature of being? And there's an interesting cosmological theory that in the deepest, darkest vacuum of space, far away from any other stars or planets, in that cold absence of anything, bit by bit, there are little particles that pop into being and then disappear, pop into being. And so this is sometimes referred to as kind of the quantum foam. There's this sort of this energy, this energetic something is coming, wanting to come forth. And the theory here is that when a particle is formed, there's a particle and there's an antiparticle, matter and antimatter, and they cancel each other out. Except sometimes the matter is somehow, in some sense, more robust than the antimatter, and the antimatter dissolves, leaving the matter. And so over the course of billions of years, matter has developed because it's somehow more robust than antimatter. So thus we exist, right? So that's a nice theory, but how does that lead to what we know to be creation today? So the second feature here is evolution. So there's emanation, there's evolution, and the process of evolution is something that is really very well known scientifically, but it has been a huge issue theologically. I have heard people say to me that you can believe in God or you can believe in evolution, but you can't believe in both. Because from their perspective, God is the being that created everything ex nihilo in the very beginning 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. So evolution is a process that's very well observed and documented, but it's a fairly modern notion. And not only do we know that evolution is real, that it actually exists, it's an intrinsic part of the nature of being, but it also has direction and it has purpose. As evolution unfolds reality, it unfolds in the direction of greater and greater complexity. Each new thing that arises is more complex than the previous thing. And this complexity is moving the beings that arise into a capacity for greater and greater consciousness. We can see consciousness even in sunflowers. Sunflowers they're heliophilic. They will look at the sun, right? So they're conscious, they know where the sun is, and they move according to the presence of that sun. Well, we as humans are far more conscious and we are more adaptive and we pay attention to more things. We have a greater, higher, deeper, larger experience of consciousness. But as we all know, we're not fully conscious yet. Consciousness continues to arise within us. So how is it that this evolution happens, right? And so the third feature here is emergence. So emergence here, right? So emergence happens as Nancy Ellen Abrams wrote a really interesting book called A God That Could Be Real. She discovered that in order to work her 12-step program, she needed to have a belief in a power greater than herself. And she's a consummate scientist. And so she had to find God, something about the nature of God that was scientifically real and could be understood to be worthy of the name God. And the quality of emergence is what she came to. Emergence is the process by which, when you have a set of things together and they are in sufficient proximity and density, they create a new thing. When the three are held in tension, the fourth arises in a new dimension. So you take a bunch of molecules that are gas molecules and you in some sense contain them within a container, within an atmosphere, but in some sense they are a system. One of the things that will arise is that the atmosphere has qualities that are different or are in addition to any other qualities of the molecules within it. Pressure, humidity, what am I leaving out? Temperature. Pressure, temperature, and humidity are all qualities of the atmosphere. We read the weather report, but they are not qualities of the individual molecules that are within the atmosphere. If you're in a relationship with someone and you know each other, you know that you're known by the other, you have respect for each other, you value each other, you are acting on each other's behalf. Doesn't mean you're doing exactly what they want you to do, but you're paying attention to how your behavior is affecting them. What arises is a quality that we call trust. Right? If you have fuel and heat and oxygen in proximity and density, what you will have is fire. Fire will naturally arise every time when you have sufficient heat, fuel, and oxygen together, and you put out the fire by taking away any one of those three. If you have a sailboat and its keel is in the water and there's wind in its sail and you've got a helmsman at the helm, that sailboat can actually travel faster than the wind because you're using those three together: the water, the wind, and the helmsman, holding them in tension. When the three are held in tension, a fourth arises in a new dimension. And so Creator God brings creation into the world bit by bit, ever moving towards greater complexity and consciousness, bringing new dimensions into being by the interaction of the three components. God itself is an expression of the law of three. God is Trinity. All right, next week we're going to talk about God, talk about the mind of God. All right, hope to see you then.